All right, everyone. So we are going to start talking about a new concept for this class, but something that we're all already sort of familiar with, and we're going to be talking about active and passive voice. We are going to continue to cover active and passive voice in future classes, and we'll get into the more technical side of things. But for right now, I just want to introduce the concepts, and do not worry, we already use both active and passive voice every day, but for different purposes and in different contexts. And that's really what we want to get at today. We want to get at what contexts value which type of voice. So let's dive right in. So first, we're going to talk about active voice. And I have a sentence on the board for us that is in active voice. And what can we note about this sentence, other than I must have been thinking about food when I made it? Right, it starts with I. Okay, so that is a really key signifier in a lot of cases that we're going to be speaking in active voice. Active voice makes an effort to put the person doing an action first. So if there is a person or a thing or a place that is going to be completing an action, performing a verb, then generally speaking, that sentence is gearing itself up to be an active voice. Active voice is pretty straightforward. And so in active voice, we say, I will eat a hamburger for dinner tonight. No mystery in that sentence. We know from one step to the next what's going to happen. And in fact, what you'll start to realize is that when we speak, we almost always speak in mostly active voice. So active voice is really important when it comes to speaking. When you're having a conversation with somebody, you're going to speak in active voice most of the time by default. But if you're not, somebody will probably point out to you that you're sounding a little strange, and it could be the case that you are switching too much into passive voice. So let's talk about passive voice. And to first talk about passive voice, I want to talk about a figure that you might be familiar with from Star Wars. His name's Yoda. And Yoda says silly things. I can try to draw Yoda. It's not going to be good. I'm not very good at drawing. I'll draw a circle. He has what? Floppy ears. Yep. And then eyes and a mouth. I think that's the worst Yoda I've ever seen. But what Yoda says is stuff like this. He'll say, troubled, comma, you are. Now what's going on here? What do you guys think? So yeah, one of the things is we have a comma, which means that we're breaking things up into clauses. Yep, that's right. And then something else is going on. You is not starting the sentence. Unlike this sentence that starts with the person, I, this sentence is starting with a different word. It's starting with what would be the end of the sentence up here. So troubled you are, instead of saying you are troubled. So if Yoda had said you are troubled, he'd be speaking in active voice, but he doesn't. He speaks in the passive most of the time. So let's take Yoda's example and then apply it to our own sentence, the sentence that we have before us. And a good way to make a switch from active to passive is to reverse the sentence as much as possible. We could say something like this. Tonight, comma, because since we're reversing clauses, we're going to need these commas. So tonight, for dinner, comma. And as we know, that when we're adding any type of clarifying clause, whether it's adverb, adjective, we need to set that off with commas on each side. So we've got tonight, for dinner, a hamburger, And now we're at a somewhat tricky phrase. So we're at, I will eat a hamburger, but we're saying tonight for dinner, a hamburger will be ate. Close, not quite there. Will be eaten. That's right. So, will be eaten. Eaten? We'll double check the spelling on that later. Will be eaten. And who's going to do it? You are. So, will be eaten by I, right? No, not right. Okay. Yeah, a hamburger will be eaten by me. Great. We have now made a passive sentence. So tonight, for dinner, a hamburger will be eaten by me. I'm going to go out on a limb and say most of us don't speak this way regularly. This is not a common way to structure your sentence when you're talking. However, what you might notice is that in school, especially, when we're writing essays or when we're reading textbooks, we see this kind of phrasing. And that is because academic writing in a lot of different fields really values the idea or the action, what is happening, more than it values the author or the person. Now, there are, of course, exceptions, and we'll get into those exceptions as we continue with our next activity. But what's good to realize right now is that active voice is always going to be around in speaking. Passive voice is most likely going to be found in academic writing. But I want to specify that when we look at passive voice in writing, a lot of times what we're looking at are the science fields. In a minute, we're going to take a look at some writing samples from different textbooks from multiple disciplines. So that way we can start to recognize which fields tend more towards passive voice, which fields might use some active voice, and then which fields use a blend of both. This should be really helpful as you guys continue on with college, because if you can begin to recognize how somebody is constructing their thoughts, you can start to understand what they value most in their writing. So are they valuing this person to start things off? Are they valuing this sort of straightforwardness, or are they valuing ideas first and leaving certain parts of the sentence or certain actors in the sentence till the end? We'll also explore different reasons for doing those things along the way. So let's go ahead and break into groups, 3 to 4 per group, and then we will get started.